this new session at Room for Discussion. The blockchain technology is the technology behind the Bitcoin. And today we'll talk about that it can not only be used for cryptocurrencies, but it can also be used for smart contracts, voting, e-auctions, and many more uses. First, we'll discuss how the technology works. Afterwards, the impact it will have on the sectors of finance, governance, and inequality. And finally, the challenges society will face when we will be implementing this technology. Our first guest here today is Simone Vermeend. She wrote the first Dutch book on the blockchain technology in order to fulfill her interest in this field. De blockchain, de technologie die de wereld radicaal verandert. Our second guest here today is Louis de Bruin, and his interest in the IT world was so big that he became the blockchain leader at IBM Europe at the digital operations. Feel free to ask during the interview questions at the microphone at Jeppe, or if you're following our live stream via Twitter by using the hashtag RFD. Now give a warm round of applause for our guest here today. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks.
Welcome on my behalf as well. Get comfortable.
Thank you.
Mr. De Bruin, your first experience with the blockchain was when a friend owed you some money for a meal and paid you with, at the time, worthless bitcoins.
Correct.
How did you react to this?
Well, I thought, let him do it, and let's see what happens. And I thought it was some sort of a Ponzi scheme. And then a year later, we met again, and we had dinner again, and I said, you pay. And he said, have you checked your bitcoins? The rest is history.
He made you rich. Did you have a similar sort of first experience with the blockchain or the Bitcoin, Ms. Vermeend?
No, actually, I was just intrigued by, because you heard a lot about the new technology, and I'm always intrigued by new stuff. So I dived into it, and I was a bit frustrated, basically, because you have a lot of books, but also on the internet, which are either high level or super technical, and I'm not that technical.
But where did this interest come from initially? Did you?
Well, just because you saw a lot of newspapers, but it never touched upon what it really was, and it really did, and how it really worked.
It always stayed maybe a bit abstract, and you wanted to really get a full understanding of what it could do, maybe.
Yeah, I was wondering, what can I do with this? And in order to be able to answer that question, you basically have to have a basic understanding about how it works.
And Mr. De Bruin, was this exchange between your friend the moment that sparked your interest into the blockchain?
Absolutely, yeah. Then I realized that a year later it was still there. It was, by the way, the same person that introduced me long before most of you were born to internet. So he was an early adopter, and yeah, it really sparked my interest very much. And it just like with you, I couldn't let go of it anymore. And it's a phenomenal concept, and it's now 9 years old, has been working without a problem, and so many new uses for it. That's great. Yeah.
Did you also know at the time this would really be the next big thing? You compared it a bit to the internet.
I couldn't believe it, but the same thing, I couldn't believe internet when I first saw it. Is this real? Can this really function? Is this not going to blow out of proportion? And if you look back now at internet, and if you would describe internet in today's terms to somebody 25 years ago, you wouldn't believe it would exist, because internet is 95% email spam, it's been used for pornography, it's been used for crime, the WannaCry virus and all that. You would think we should never start with that sort of technology. And here we are, we couldn't believe we would do without it. And I think blockchain will develop in very different ways than we believe at the moment, and we understand at the moment, but it will develop, and we see so many uses of it already that it's just a start.
We'll get to all these uses in a bit. But
but first let's concentrate on how the technology works. So in 2008 was the white paper of Satoshi Nakamoto was published, where it gave the instructions on how the Bitcoin can be created. Why was it specifically then that it was published, Mr. De Bruin?
Yeah, of course, 2008 was an interesting time with the financial crisis and the near collapse of the financial system. So probably it had something to do with that. It's not probably. You can see in the Genesis block that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, he very clearly alluded to that. But it was not the first time that people did that. Actually, in 1996 already, there has been a document written by people from the NSA of all that was called "How to Make a Mint," and it's about the principle of cryptocurrency. So the idea is old, and actually the idea is much older than that.
And this idea is that there's no intermediary between people to control the transaction. So that it was published for that reason, right? In that period.
Yeah, it was for that reason. It was a distributed ledger is of course a very, because that's what the blockchain in principle is a very attractive principle where you don't have a central system, which is also a central point of failure, potential failure, which can be attacked, which also hands over power. You hand over power to a central service. So for a lot of people, that's a very attractive alternative, that you have a distributed ledger, a form of democracy, a device democracy that we all can participate in. I think.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if you state in very easy terms, you can say that basically everywhere where you have transactions, these days we use a central intermediary. So if I would transact or exchange money with you, I don't really know you, so probably I don't trust you. I need, for example, a bank for that. And in the early days, basically what the internet did, the internet decentralized information. So everyone could write blogs and information got distributed. However, what it doesn't really solve is it's not really suited for transacting value. Because on the internet, you can copy everything. You can copy music, you can copy documents, and you don't want to copy, for example, money or value. And basically, where still nowadays, if you transact over the internet, you still need a central intermediary. However, with blockchain, what it allows, by means of cryptography and a distributed network, it basically allows you to transact value without the need of a central intermediary.
And the focus is on transacting rather than copying or... Exactly. So you gave the it's not just cryptocurrencies like such as the Bitcoin that it can be used for, but for anything of value. You mentioned music. Are there any other concrete examples you would have of what can be exchanged with the blockchain?
Well, it's a little bit abstract, but you can also say information.
Well, today we'll try and make it concrete.
Yeah.
So
If you think of value, people really, very fast think about monetary value. But it's also, if I have a piece of land, for example, that's also value. And that piece of land is registered on my name, that's also value. And you have, I believe, which could have a potential huge impact, is that you have a lot of countries in the Netherlands. It's very well arranged. It's very well registered. This piece of land is of Louis. This one is of mine. This is my house. This is of Louis. But there are countries where basically government says, "Hey, my government computer, it says that this piece of land is no longer yours. It's mine." So especially where there's corruption in the system, you could use blockchain very well to register. This is my piece of land. Yeah. And it will always be visible to anyone. You cannot adopt it without consent of the system.
Exactly. So trust is one of the main points of the blockchain.
But perhaps it's a nice idea for people who still think what it is to show some very old concepts that actually have been around since prehistoric times.
The idea is not.
No, it's not that new. And especially in prehistoric times, people couldn't write, so there wasn't the possibility to have a central ledger. And I think a very nice example, it's not the only one, but it's the most prevalent one, I think, is what happened in the kingdom of Yap. I think it still exists, actually. It's in Polynesia, a couple of islands. And thousands of years ago, on one of these islands, there was a quarry, a stone quarry. And that was unique. There was no stone anywhere else. So they started to make coins out of them. So round, big. If you look it up, Yap, if you Google on it, you will find them big stones, enormous stones, like 3, 4, 10 feet wide, but also the size of this table. And they were exchanged as money. And they still do that for ceremonial purposes. However, every time a stone was transferred from one island to the other on little shaky canoes, it sometimes happened that a boat sank and the stone went to the bottom of the ocean. And about 1,000 years ago, they stopped moving these stones. And the reason was that there had been a big incident. Somebody had provided cattle to somebody on one island. That person on that island had transferred a stone. The stone sank, and there was a dispute. And the wise people from these islands then came together and said, how can we avoid this from happening? He said, let's just realize that stone on the bottom of the ocean isn't gone. It's just the stone on the bottom of the ocean. And if we all acknowledge it's yours, you can also give it to somebody else. And we all know that the stone at the bottom of the ocean is now yours. And that is actually what was decided, an open outcry system. So every time value, transaction, as Simone said, took place, there would be open outcry that the stone on the bottom of the ocean would then be yours. And at that moment, everybody would say that. And in the minds of all people, they would have a register that that's the case. So if somebody would then all of a sudden say, hey, it's my stone, everybody say, no, it's Simone's stone. And because there would be 10 other people to stand up. And that's a distributed ledger, as simple as that. There was
idea of transfer of property is nothing new then, and it's kind of being discovered by a small island in the Pacific.
Yeah, and the distributed ledger, that's really the key.
But that's very difficult to, if in societies as today, there's a lot of people that transact. Yeah. We cannot remember everyone doing a transaction. So what is that it makes so special that the blockchain is able to do this?
Well, the difference is computers. Because in those days, there were about a couple of transactions a week. So everybody could remember, every stone was unique, so everybody could remember that. And now we're talking about millions of transactions, probably per second. So that's the difference, that we now have computing power to do this. And that is, but the principle is the same. Now, one principle is the principle of the distributed ledger. The other principle is that in a blockchain, the blockchain carries, and that's why it's called a block, a chain of blocks that contains the history of that value, or how that has been transferred. So for instance, the land that has been transferred in a blockchain is not just for this stone, this piece of land has been, no, it says this stone has been transferred to Simone by Louis for this piece of land, and Louis received that stone from Chris for the cattle that he bought, and that goes back until you, Paolo, have mined that stone, and that's the beginning of the story. Okay. And that is also a prehistoric way of communicating. I think a lot of people know how Ayaan Hirsi Ali once announced herself, saying, I'm the daughter of, and the granddaughter of, and etc. So that's also...
So time is also a strong part of it, how it's set in time with the timestamp. Would you, Ms. Vermeend, would you also say that this is the main reason why the blockchain is sort of perceived to be so uncrackable? Or is that really true?
Till today, it's really true. I believe it will be true.
It's never been able to break or be hacked? Or?
No, you have some hacks, but they never touch the blockchain principle itself. But what we as people do, on the blockchain, we build kind of applications, for example, wallets to be able to transact. And all the hacks up to this point have always been at the level of the application, of the software applications, of the wallets, for example. So not of the blockchain in itself. Yeah. And what makes it very strong is, as Louis said, you have the blocks, you have the whole history. But basically what it does, I have now a few boxes of history, and each box I put them in a chain, and all the boxes in that chain are referring to the previous one. If you would pick one block out, you basically break the chain, so we will notice it. And if I want to change something in one of these blocks, which is more in the beginning, the reference of the previous block, it's not correct anymore. So you cannot easily change things. And that makes it, in that sense...
it's not easy to change because also everyone in the network has the blockchain, the same blockchain, and therefore they cannot change it, right?
If you would want to change something, you have to have at least 50% of the power, or you have to break the consensus that exists. So you have to have a quorum, which is extremely difficult, and if not impossible, because often you don't even know who they are. Whereas if you have a central system, you know that's where I have to be. You don't know where you have to be. That's one part of it. The other part is also that is cryptographically encoded. So information in a blockchain is not in normal language. It is encoded, and there are keys to decode that. And so that's an additional feature that makes it as good as impossible to break a blockchain.
And let's continue a bit on the collaborative aspect of the blockchain, because that's one of the big advantages that is supposed to ensure the trust. But how would this sort of distributed collaboration be better than a centralized institutions? What's the advantages of this? Ms. Vermeend, maybe.
I don't know whether it's always better. It's just different. And for some applications, it could be better. But in general, if you look more, to continue a little bit on the security level, with a central system, you have high risks, especially with hacks and hackers. You have a high risk that a central system can be hacked. What a blockchain,
this is where all the
this is where all the information is. For example, with my health data, I hope it never gets stolen, but it's still somewhere in a central system. With blockchain, basically, what everyone in this room would have kind of a copy, and if you want to hack it, and that's what Louis is referring to with you need 50%. For example, if now we would all be a kind of blockchain system, so everyone has this copy of what's true, and now Louis decides, I don't want to change this. Basically, he has to convince like this entire part of the space that he's right, and that the rest is incorrect, and that will take some time and effort, and so that makes it strong.
So, but we also see there the Bitcoin was a public blockchain, and there are also private blockchains. What is the difference, Mr. Bruin, between a public blockchain and a private blockchain?
I rather would use the word permissioned blockchain, but that's semantics.
Why permissioned blockchain?
Because a private blockchain means that it's not public. A permissioned blockchain can be also a public blockchain, but it requires permission to take part in the blockchain. So the blockchain that we've just been discussing, the Bitcoin blockchain, is indeed a public open blockchain. Anybody can, at this very moment, anybody can take their phone or their computer and download the blockchain and is part of the system. There's no permission required for that. And you can do that anonymously. With a permissioned blockchain, and that is really the normal way we transact. If we do business, if I sell my house to Simone, Simone wants to know who I am. This is the interesting thing of the Bitcoin blockchain. You transact with people you often don't know, and they even don't want to know who you are, because that's how the WannaCry virus works. You have to send 300 euros worth of Bitcoin to an address that belongs to somebody you don't know. And often we don't, usually if we do business, we don't want to do that. I want to know who I'm dealing with. And therefore you have permissioned blockchains where everybody makes themselves known and are part of that system. So there's knowledge there, who is who, and there's an authority to identify people. And the data in the blockchain, and that's the opposite from the Bitcoin blockchain, the data in a permissioned blockchain is actually totally encrypted. And so I don't want my competitors to know what I sold my product to you to. And so that sort of information is encrypted, whereas in the blockchain, the data is totally open and visible. The Bitcoin blockchain, everything is open and visible to everybody.
But in the permissioned blockchain, everyone can make themselves known, but not everyone can participate.
Not everybody can participate. You participate based on the need to participate. It is, of course, possible if you would have a government blockchain between a number of entities, or a financial blockchain or whatever, with a number of entities like banks, insurance companies, customs authorities. We as citizens would also have to take part in that, but we wouldn't have to be part of the blockchain itself. We would use an app or a computer interface and a web interface, a URL, to access the blockchain, and we would identify ourselves just like we identify ourselves now when we do banking.
Okay.
Right?
That's very interesting. Are there any audience questions on how the blockchain technology works? I see there, Jeppe.
Hi.
Wait.
I have two questions for you. You emphasize that creating each block is going to cost a lot of computer power. That's the power of blockchain. Okay, imagine if someone put in a huge server in the middle of a desert somewhere in the I don't know, in the Middle East, and using sun power to operate, to make that thing operational. And with an eye of quantum mechanics, which is coming, is progressing very quick. Would be blockchain still very safe?
So what he's trying to say that because in order to keep all the data, the blockchain, you need a lot of power in order also to do all the various transactions, and so.
You raise a lot of very interesting topics, and I think you also are dying to say something about it. But shall I take it first?
Yeah.
Or, yeah?
So
First, the question about, I think you're alluding to a lot of computing power. With a lot of computing power, you can break the consensus. You can become a major player. Well, there's two things to that. I first will address it from a public blockchain point of view, the Bitcoin. A permission blockchain works totally different. So in a public blockchain as Bitcoin, you're right that it requires a lot of computing power to create the consensus, and that's how the Bitcoins are created. But there is an algorithm within the Bitcoin protocol that monitors how many cycles, how much computing power is in a network, and as soon as somebody adds, and you say the Middle East, but I would think rather of somebody like Kim Jong-un, he would add a lot of computing power and a lot of energy to create a majority of power in the system, then the complexity of the blockchain formula is risen to a level that everybody else says, forget about it, I'm not putting computing power in that, and he's the only one to solve that. That will raise flags with everybody like this is not a trustable system. So there is a level of checking that doesn't happen. It's very difficult, not totally impossible, but it's most unlikely that happens. Regarding public blockchains, permission blockchains, that's not possible, and it's not necessary, because in a permission blockchain you know who's participating, so you don't need that sort of complex mechanism for consensus that requires coins, cryptocurrencies to be made. So it's a totally different ball game, and it doesn't require excessive energy. Now, as far as the quantum computing you mentioned, and that really alludes to the fact that lots of information, as Simone also said, private information could be stored in a blockchain. If you do that, you have to be careful, because at some stage, you're right, quantum computing or technology evolves, so there's always a race between the current level of cryptography and breaking that. And when that is done, you will need a new level, but the old data it would be possible to decrypt that. So our advice is never to store, definitely not in a public blockchain, but also be careful in a permission blockchain to store private information in the blockchain itself. Now, there are very interesting ways you can deal with that, and I think it will take a little bit too far to do that. But that's
have to be careful with what we store. Do you agree with?
Yeah, and to add one small, very simple principle, and it's based on the principle of economics. If you want to do this, you need to do massive amounts of investments, and basically, if you probably want to gain something, and the amount of investment that you need to do this, it's just way higher than the benefits that you will probably reap from it.
And that's why it hasn't happened yet. That's why even up to now, the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have not been broken.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Let's quickly move on, because we've discussed the workings of the blockchain, but I think what we really find interesting here today is the impact that it can have on our society. And we would like to do that by looking at the impact that it can have on three fields: finance, government, and maybe inequality in the sharing economy. So, Mrs. Vermeend, the blockchain is one of the main topics discussed in the financial sector at the moment. And I feel that when this came up, it was really seen as a threat, but now it's kind of shift towards that it could be an opportunity, and they're investing in it. Where did this shift come from?
I'm not aware where the shift suddenly came from. I think what is very interesting to see is that it fosters a lot of cooperation. And basically, in blockchain technology, you cannot do it alone. It only adds value if you connect multiple parties. So, based on the principle of how the technology is being built, it stimulates cooperation amongst people, so also among people in the same sector or also cross-sector.
Yeah, and the financial sector seems to be the main investor in this, in the technology at the moment, or the biggest investor. Why the financial sector, not other industries, for example? Why are they the ones investing?
I'm sure that will come, and actually there are a lot of investment from other industries. But to make it very logical, the first real blockchain application was Bitcoin.
Yes.
And it's the most intuitive, because we know a little bit how it works already. And if you look in the financial sector, we have, I think, in two areas. One, if you look at there's a huge amount of remittances. So I think, for example, if you take
it's very large.
For example, I think in Nepal, 31% of the GDP.
International transactions.
It's coming from remittances. I think in the Philippines it's 28%, something like that. So that's huge. And if you then take into account that to make such a transaction possible, it usually takes a few days.
Yes.
If I want to send money, cross-border. And additionally, sometimes you pay like 10% of fees. Basically, with blockchain, and specifically Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, I could now send money to the other end of the world in a matter of seconds without paying, basically saying a few percent points
So also
of transaction fees.
Transaction fees would lower down through the implementation of the blockchain.
Yeah.
But is also efficiency increased?
Yeah, because it goes way faster.
It goes way faster.
Yeah.
So it's about networks between the banks, but also creating more efficiency.
Yeah.
So
Can I say something
Yes,
to that one? Because I think you're touching on something that is really the reason why financial institutions are taking on blockchain. The first thing with Bitcoin was shock. How is this possible? And is this threatening us? And we all know Bitcoin didn't blow the telephone away. I mean, the internet didn't blow the telephone away. We still have, even today, we still have newspapers. So it always is adapted in a different way than you think.
Though.
They're slowly disappearing. But let's talk again in 10 years and see if the newspapers are all gone. But they will go in a different shape. They will be in an electronic shape, but they're not gone yet, right? So the same thing goes with, once they saw that, at first they thought, we don't like it, we don't want it. And the next thing was curiosity. Well, how the hell does this work, right? And then they realized, my God, there's so many processes, complicated processes, in banks and in insurance companies and all between companies in ecosystems that can be facilitated. And at the moment, there's so many interactions required between participants in an ecosystem that if you have 10 participants, so for instance, you have a seller, a buyer, an insurer, a bank, a transporter, they all need to contact each other. So if you have 10 of these parties that I just described, you would have easily 10 times 10 is 100 interactions for a simple transaction. With a blockchain, you would have one interaction with a blockchain, so you would have 10 times one interaction instead of 10 times 10, and probably 2 would also drop out because they are intermediaries. So you would probably go from 100 to 8 interactions with a blockchain. And that is efficiency, so but it also reduces mistakes and the possibility for fraud.
But also making the network more efficient between parties. That's
exactly.
Because if you now look at a daily basis, there are so many reconciliations that need to take place on a daily basis because each and every institution has their own database. And indeed, as you're saying, there's a huge risk for mistakes. And nobody likes that.
But the financial sector is also often known to be a very static sector that is really holding on to their status quo business model. Are they ready to make this restructure? Mr. De Bruin, perhaps.
Well, I think fintech is the word now, right? It's not anymore, we're not talking anymore about banks. We're talking about a transformation of banks and financial institutions into fintech. So it's the technology part using artificial intelligence and Internet of Things and blockchain to enable this. So yes, there is enormous readiness. We see consortia being built, like the R3 consortium, where people are working together in blockchain type of technologies. And
how many companies work in that R3?
Well, I'm not here for R3, but I think something like 80, something like that, Jelle, something like that.
I did read an article on several banks pulling out of the R3 project. Is this
well, I'm not here for to discuss R3. There are many of these I can speak for our own business, IBM, and yes, financial services are the main interest, the biggest one taking this on, but at the same time we see utilities, insurance companies, and also government being very interested and already adopting blockchain technology in their core business processes.
And
I also think what we should not forget, if you look at a global scale, basically still there at this moment there are 2 billion people like under banks. They don't have access to the normal financial system. And usually if you want, if you look at growth of people and their access towards prosperity, one of the first steps is that they basically have access to the financial system. So they can get credit, that they can store their money somewhere safely, that they can transact not only on a cash basis. And one of the reasons why this is currently because for banks and other financial institutions, it's too expensive to provide services to these people because the amount of money that they deliver is just not enough. But basically by means of blockchain technology, the use of that, you could create systems where it's so low cost to provide services that you can open up financial systems to an entire new population.
But at the same time, banks have the role of being an intermediary. Isn't this idea of the blockchain taking away the intermediary a threat to them? Aren't these big corporations the ones that will also try to block the blockchain in some sense?
Well, it is for every organization. We're talking about banks now, but it could just as well be utilities or corporations like I represent. It is a tsunami that's coming towards us. And whether you like it or not, it's coming, just like climate change. You can close your eyes, but it's still happening. So we have to adapt. So we have to find our new role in the blockchain economy, just like many companies had to reinvent themselves because of e-business.
But even if changing your role becomes losing your role, because
It could sometimes that means you lose your role, but usually if you are quick, if you think quick on your feet and see the advantages of new technology, you can evolve into something new. And that's what you see with the most successful newspapers. We just discussed that. Those who are providing excellent content, up-to-date content, can raise paywalls, even on the internet. So they provide the same services that they did before, but much more efficiently, and people are paying for that. So you see it as an opportunity. If you see it as a threat, it will only end one way, and that is the wrong way. If you see it as an opportunity, it may mean that you are turning into a different sort of company than you were before, but you can still be there.
Okay, so you mentioned before government, and we have seen in the past years that the voter turnout in Western democracies has been at an all-time low. How could the blockchain play a role in voters' participation?
I think in the Netherlands it will. We have a pretty secure system of voting. So I think really where it can really change is especially in the countries where it's more corrupt. I personally believe that still, if you look at our own system in the Netherlands and voting, I believe that we will still for a very long time still have to go to physically to a place where we vote, because otherwise someone could sit next to me and it could press vote somewhere, and then could all be very secure online. However, that online system does not know whether someone next to me pushes me to vote in a certain way.
But couldn't an online system also increase the numbers of the people that vote? Because that's quite a problem of today.
Yeah, it could be. But I think that's still the quality of the votes is more important than the turnout.
Yeah, I agree. I think blockchain is a technology, and if you want to have voters' participation, I can imagine that, as Simone said, in countries where people don't trust the system, it would increase voters' participation, because you know your vote is cast anonymously, securely, and will be properly addressed, and you can check that your vote has been properly cast, which is now impossible. Even for us, it's impossible. But in countries where we live, voters' participation doesn't depend on the technology. It depends on the political system itself. Saying that, I think it will lead to very interesting new developments, because it will lead to much more secure and fast voting. And you would see many new polls come up that aren't possible at this moment. So I see a great potential for voting, but it's not the first one that I would.
It's not for turnout, basically.
But how would the government... how could a blockchain-driven government look like?
Concretely,
Concrete
because that's what we're for here.
Yeah. How could it look like?
How blockchain voting, or what do you mean?
No,
No,
a
government.
driven by a blockchain.
I have a little example here. We do an experiment at this moment with the Dutch Vehicle and Licensing Administration, RDW. And it is about registering, dealing with the aftermath of bike theft. Well, isn't that everybody has had a bike stolen?
In Amsterdam, definitely.
Okay. And in the future, we will all use electric bikes. They're expensive. They start over 1,000, 2,000 euros. They will be equipped with smart locks that will tell you where the bike is and whether the bike is actually locked or not. And, well, currently, if your bike is stolen, you have a hassle, because the first thing the police ask if you want to report it, what's your vehicle identification number? And yeah, my bike is stolen, so I don't know that, right? So that's the first obstacle. And once you found out about that, you have to find out who was I insured with, and was I actually insured against theft? And then after weeks and weeks, you find out that either you were insured or you weren't insured, and you've lost a lot of time, and all parties have had a frustration. That's the current situation. Now, fast forward to the bike blockchain that RDW is experimenting with at this moment. The moment I walk out of this door and I look for my bike and it's gone, I take out my smartphone and I want to talk to the bike, say, where are you? And I don't get a response. Yeah, that's because somebody took the bike, put it into a van, and it can't communicate with me. So the next thing I then do is go to the blockchain. And in the blockchain, there's a smart contract, and I say, where should my bike be? Because my bike reports every time it moves to the blockchain its actual position. And then I read, yeah, it should be right there, Routerstraat 11, yeah, and you're there, so apparently the bike is stolen. So the third click I do is bike stolen, and then the following happens. Automatically the data, my data and the data of my bicycle, the vehicle identification number and everything is in the blockchain, is reported to the police. The police knows it's secure because it's in the blockchain. Police runs it through its normal vehicle theft system and finds out that I'm not fraudulent, let's assume that. So then it's reported into the blockchain that the vehicle is reported as stolen. The next thing the blockchain does is check whether it was open or closed. If it was open, it will say you were negligent and I don't have the possibility to have a claim. If it was closed, it will report it to the insurance company, and which is registered in the blockchain. And within 3 seconds, I know exactly where I stand. I'm insured, or I was not insured against theft, so I'm not insured, but there's no discussion, there's not a lot of ways. So the whole process is reduced from 20 days to
So through this really specific example of the blockchain on the bikes,
yes,
you showed that the government can work well together with the police, with the insurer, with all these different parties to be more efficient.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Yeah, and if you touch upon, I think it's super interesting to think about how the government could change through blockchain. I also think it's one of the most difficult questions because, frankly,
they want to maintain their power as well, I guess, or.
Yeah, or it will change. And frankly, we don't know. The government doesn't know either. So I think they currently have about 15 or 20 blockchain experiments running, also to figure out themselves, like how could this change? And
whether they would be willing to give up their control that they have now for efficiency and transparency, perhaps.
Yeah, or I think control changes. And it doesn't necessarily entirely mean giving up. It's also facilitation. I mean, there's someone who needs to facilitate also these blockchains. Correct. And at some point, there's also someone who, it's blockchain in the end, it's still code. And a few things by means you mentioned in your introduction, by means of smart contracts, that's also just code. And there's also someone needed who says, hey, this piece of code, that's correct, it's okay. So I think new functions also for the government will emerge, also by kind of proving or stamping that blockchains are well programmed. And
I think another element is that in the Netherlands, it is more receptive, I think, to blockchain than many societies. And we don't realize it, but Holland is extremely advanced in the way it's automated its public processes.
Yeah, but it still uses Windows XP in many of its government facilities. So
yeah, it's true. Well, I think Holland has not been hit half as hard as, for instance, the UK and other countries. I think, but there is still some room to grow. But on the other hand, you can see that in the Netherlands we do travel with one card throughout the country and use all media of transport. We don't have post offices anymore. That's something from the past. Which country doesn't have post offices anymore? We barely have bank branches. Talking about fintech transformation is really happening. And most communication with the government in the Netherlands also goes through internet and apps. So the Netherlands is ready for the next level of automation and rationalization. And blockchain makes it a good candidate for the future, just like Internet of Things and cognitive computing.
But there's also countries that are less developed, but they have less of these infrastructures of bureaucracies and everything, like Estonia. Estonia is an example of a front run in the blockchain
Absolutely.
technology. Aren't the less economical developed countries have a front run towards the implementation of this technology?
Well, you often see that you can skip a stage if you come from a less developed situation to a future situation. Like in Africa also, you see that there is a lot of use of mobile phones in a way we don't do. There are exchanges for fishers who can sell their fish already while they're still on their boats on the ocean, and they can already find somebody to buy it. We don't work like that, but they do. Like you said, the banking for the underbanked. We see payment systems coming up in other countries. So Estonia is an excellent example that came from a totalitarian system and say never again. So there's a much more bigger need with a big neighbor like Russia in front of it. They would like to have a proven system that says this is where Estonia sits, and if ever there is somebody invading us, we can say this is a blockchain that's saying exactly who owned what, who was in what position, and we can always prove the reality. And this is the situation, for instance, that you have at the Crim at the moment, the Crimean situation where Russia has taken over. There is not a clean time zero there. If ever they would leave and the Crimean area would go back to the Ukraine, it would be a very messy process to sort out where it was. If you had a blockchain at that time, everybody can revert to the time that blockchain was in place, and everybody knows how the real situation was.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And also this idea of the sharing economy. I mean, everyone should be able to contribute within the blockchain, but in that sense also any activity, no matter how small, can be monetized as well. Is this really a world we want to live in? Is this desirable, Ms. Vermeend?
That's really personal, I think. I think if you, for example, now look at really well-known sharing economy examples, like, for example, Airbnb. The question is, do you really like the fact that there's still one central authority where your money goes through that makes a lot of money thanks to your money? Well, you could also, through a blockchain, will be able to connect directly to someone. Mm-hmm. So in such an example, I think it's good that you have like a more distributed system where people can monetize their efforts themselves.
Would we ever still see favors, or will everything be become a transaction? What's your opinion on that?
Nothing develops the way you think, exactly. Yeah? I mean, we thought that with the internet, everything would be democratized, and now what we see Amazon becoming the retailer of the world, we see Google becoming the search engine of the world. So there are, even in the virtual world, there are still monopolies forming. So I think blockchain can counter some of those elements, but never for 100%. Blockchain is also something that sits more in the back, whereas internet through the World Wide Web has become something we all are aware of. The internet existed before the World Wide Web started, but that's really what opened it up for all of us. I don't see blockchain, at this moment, I can't envision blockchain becoming anything more than a seal of trust. Blockchain inside You can trust this. But I don't see it as becoming a revolution like the World Wide Web. It will just make our lives easier, and everything can be scrutinized by everybody. You can check things. I think we will be much more secure in the way things are dealt with in the future than we have now.
But you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want to live in a world where everything can be monetized, if I understand that correctly, and you don't think that's going to happen?
No, I don't think. Blockchain is as Simone also said, it's about value transfer, but it doesn't mean that everything has to be monetized. Quite the opposite. At the moment, things are monetized because of inefficiencies. You pay for transactions because there is inefficiency, not because it is efficient. And when you have blockchain technology, a lot of these processes become more efficient and cheaper, and often even for free. So. I think it is actually the opposite, Chris.
Yeah, so in the current system, you very often you pay basically for trust, trust creation. And I think in a blockchain system...
This will cancel that out. Interesting. Any audience question on the impact of the blockchain on society, the sectors we've mentioned specifically?
Yes.
Hi, you guys talking about blockchain is like all rainbows and sunshine, but there's the massive threat to blockchain. Like recently you talked about the NHS in UK where the payment method was Bitcoin. And at the same time, I can go to the dark web, I can buy drugs, cheap drugs, which is good, but at the same time, you can buy child pornography, and you can buy weapons, and the payment is untraceable, so it's easy to do. And when you have a demand, when you have supply, you have a demand. So this is horrible for the whole world. So could you talk about a bit more to these threats?
Yeah, I think that's always a very interesting discussion. And obviously, I don't like that either. But this is, and there I would like to draw the parallel also with the internet. I mean, in the internet, there's also, there's porn, there's weapons, there's the dark web. And is that a reason for us altogether to not use it? And sometimes you hear people saying, that technology is neutral, and it depends on yourself how you basically use it. And I believe, sometimes technology is neutral, sometimes it's created a little bit already upfront with the wrong intent. But I think it's really a matter of how you use it, and it's not that we can together say, okay, this whole thing of anonymity, that's a problem, so we won't use it altogether. It will remain there. It won't go away. So I think it's better to face it, and in the upcoming years, also with the internet, figure out how we can deal with it and create systems around it.
Is there another question from the audience?
Oh.
My question relates to, you say that for a blockchain to pass a transaction, you need trust, so you need 50% of the participants. With capital, the majority of capital is aggregated now in a relatively small group of people. How do you prevent this from happening in a blockchain situation, for instance, with Bitcoin?
Not. You
would create a dictatorship of the majority, basically. Is there fail-safes for this?
Not. I mean, Bitcoin, and so if I talk about blockchain, I don't talk usually about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins. And this is, I think it's a very good question, because Bitcoin is somebody's idea. Somebody, this Satoshi Nakamoto, or the group of people that he represents, that name represents, had a certain idea of creating a cryptocurrency. There are others. Somebody has created Peercoin, and you have Litecoin. So there are different ways of doing this. So there are some currencies that avoid this hoarding of coins and amassing them. Bitcoin doesn't. But it's a personal choice. Just like Simone said before, it's how we want to use it. If we go for Bitcoin, that's what's happening. But you can also go for other choices, and I would definitely do that.
Is there one last question on this?
Yes. Hi. In terms of infrastructure, do you think are we ready for it? Because the latency speed of verifying a Bitcoin transaction was about 40 minutes, and considering not many people are using it now, but in the future, if you say you really want to implement it, 5G only comes in at 2020, and I'm not really sure if, in terms of infrastructure, are we ready to support blockchain?
Shall I take?
Yeah.
So, I don't care about Bitcoin, but they are working on solving that. There are ways of doing that, the Lightning Network and that sort of thing. But when I talk about blockchain for other purposes, non-financial, non-cryptocurrency purposes, especially the permissioned blockchains, you have the possibility to use high-performance business networks where all the nodes in the blockchain reside. And because you don't have, because of that, you can have high-speed transactions. You can actually, the Bitcoin network could work on a high-performance network with 400,000 transactions per second. So that's why permissioned blockchains have an enormous future and will probably in the coming years take over from the public blockchains like the cryptocurrencies.
So, thank you very much for the question. So we see the potential of this technology to make improvements in our society, but the technology is still at the end in its infancy, right? Yeah. Existing law and policymakers are not keeping up with these innovations, but maybe in the Netherlands it's another case. But Mrs. Vermeend, will this stickiness from the regulatory systems actually block the implementation of this technology?
Or the full implementation?
It won't block it. It could, in worst case, delay it. But actually what I see happening, also if you look at our own Dutch central bank, they're also experimenting with Bitcoin, with blockchain. They have their own innovation sandbox, which you can request direct all your questions towards. And I think regulators are also busy with keeping up and figuring out what they have to do with it. And also the European Central Bank, they're also looking at how do we have to regulate this? What does it ask from us? So no, I don't think it will block it. It might delay it, but yeah, it's also, I think we together have to figure out how to deal with it. It's also the same as actually when the internet came. We didn't really know how it worked. We have to experiment with it. We have to discover. We will probably fail pretty often. We will probably make mistakes altogether. And along the way, we have to figure out how a regulation and...
So who should take the lead into introducing this blockchain? Is it experts or communities on the web, or
corporates maybe?
Or corporations? Who should
everybody?
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, it's I think what we see is in certain areas and certain geographies, and Netherlands is an example of that, where we see government-initiated blockchain innovation that is being adopted by the business community, successfully adopted, and the other way around. And you also see grassroots developments, as Simone just said, and they all work together. This is a world where corporations, government, and startups, small startups, can all benefit and help each other. So
and regulation then will follow, or they won't be the front runner, I get the impression.
Well, it is actually, for regulators, blockchain can be very attractive, especially if you have permissioned blockchains. If they work efficiently, the regulator can have access to the truth. The regulator has the right to ask to participants in a permissioned blockchain, show me what you've been doing, and there is an audit trail by definition in a blockchain. So it's an enormous opportunity for regulators and for people who want good. For people who want bad, it's bad news actually. So
and the example of the central bank that you mentioned, will we need a central bank in the future?
Yeah, it's a question I've been wondering myself as well. Because if you look at the role of the central bank, it's usually it's about money supply, it's about interest rates, and managing the monetary system. And what would happen if maybe you move towards a system with more cryptocurrencies, or maybe currencies which are where you don't need the central bank.
The euros that we have in our pocket.
Yeah, so I don't know. It really depends how it will develop. I have the feeling that there will probably still be a role for a central bank to coordinate stuff.
But then maybe more on a cryptocurrency.
No, I do believe there is a very important role for central banks, and that's not because I don't believe in cryptocurrency, and I don't believe that cryptocurrencies can be regulated and will be regulated, but the success. For instance, in cryptocurrencies, you can't have negative money in a cryptocurrency. You can't issue loans in Bitcoin. You could do that between each other, but not in the system itself. You can't create negative money. And to make an economy flow, you need that. So that's why you need central banks. However, cryptocurrencies have come up in 2008 because there was mistrust in the system. So the success of the cryptocurrencies is the failure of our conventional banking system, and I don't want that to fail. So I think successful, well-functioning central banks have a tremendous value, and they're being incentivized by these new developments like cryptocurrencies to do a better job, and they're doing it. I mean, we see that we are getting in a better shape. There's still enormous challenges. I don't want to get into that discussion, but they keep there's a check and balance at the moment that wasn't there before, so that's an interesting development, but there's a role for them.
So you mentioned permissioned blockchains, and the system is about decentralization, and we have just talked about central banks.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to adapt a central system into a decentralized system? Is that
Possibly. I mean, at the moment, I see permission blockchain as a wonderful opportunity for instance, institutions like the European Union to adapt to the new reality. We all know the European Union is in trouble. People don't like the centralized nature of it. And instead of having a central new institution, you can also say, hey, we're talking with each other anyway in Brussels and in Strasbourg. We define the policies in Brussels and in Strasbourg. Let's just turn these policies into smart contracts and let every country have its own blockchain node for this new institution. And instead of having a central institution in Warsaw or in Amsterdam or in Rome, we all run it ourselves, and we just use Brussels as the consortium that runs this blockchain. Now that is, I think, a wonderful future where everybody benefits, and we reduce the cost and let also the ownership of data reside in the country where it belongs and not hand it over to a central institution in another country.
Yeah, I think an important point is that blockchain, in my opinion, will not decentralize the entire world. I mean, there will probably be, be areas where a central solution is still the most efficient one. So it's really, and I noticed that a lot also when I was writing my book, is if you look at use cases, sometimes people are really like, I just want to have a blockchain use case, and I'm going to make a blockchain out of it. And which is really important that you really think, okay, where is something inefficient? Do I somewhere have a problem? And then the technology follows. And blockchain could be a solution, but sometimes a normal database is a perfect solution as well. And that's something that we should not forget. Blockchain is not for everything. So we should really carefully look
and
what's the problem, and is then blockchain the solution?
And the very more practical problem that we often see in this discussion, I mean, it's the same as in artificial intelligence, is the job loss that will come with when the blockchain is implemented. I mean, many sectors, job functions, and thereby people could become redundant. Isn't this something that people will try and block the full implementation of the blockchain?
Well, when steam engines were invented, jobs were created. Perhaps in the beginning, the wrong sort of jobs, but in the end, many more people in numbers and in percentages were employed at the end of the Industrial Revolution than before. So, yeah, self-driving cars, we all see these scenarios of, nobody's working. We will adapt. The water flows where it has to go, and we will adapt. So there will be new jobs created. I think not having people all working in call centers, reading out scripts, they will do new things, because in the efficiency goes and more money is available for businesses to compete on a higher level. That's what internet did. That's what blockchain will did. Will create new jobs. So
would it outweigh the job loss? Would the job creation outweigh the job loss? I'm not so sure.
Future will tell.
I think that nobody knows, but you have, when the internet came, there are a lot of new business models nowadays, and a lot of companies which wouldn't have existed. Name Google, for example, and name how many jobs they have created. I mean, so yeah, we won't know, obviously, whether it will outweigh the job loss. But yeah, as Lou is saying, there will probably a lot new jobs and business models created, which we cannot envision now. And
more meaningful jobs. I think that's definitely what's happening. If you do things that are really okay.
No, is there one last audience question? Yes. over there.
Mario?
Is it working?
Hey, yeah. Looks like blockchain gives precise transparency to the assets in the supply chain, and the asset can be a product, a property, or service. This means if I go to Albertine and buy a chocolate, am I going to see where the sugar is coming from, or the palm oil is in a sustainable forest?
Would it improve source
well,
clarity?
Very nice, very practical example. In a blockchain, we are actually at this moment working with Walmart in China to identify that the meat that is in the supermarket of Walmart actually comes from the right source, so that are animals that are treated in the right way, green fat, etc. Animal welfare has been taken care of. That sort of traceability is possible in the blockchain. It needs a large number of parties to work together, but that's exactly what blockchain can. So I think it's an excellent example, and I hope that soon we will see bars of chocolate stating blockchain approved, and you can check where every ingredient comes from. Yeah.
Interesting question, thanks. We're towards the end of our interview, but a fun question I think for both of you is, how long will it take before we as students here will really see a change in our day-to-day life because of the blockchain? Ms. Vermeend, you first.
I think you already see it, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here.
The interest is here, that's for sure. But
the interest is here already.
The application of the blockchain.
Yeah, I asked you before, you don't have it at university level still, so maybe when your professors will start teaching it. No, but you already see it today, because you all heard about Bitcoin, the very first application. I think on the other hand, it will take some time for for real applications to emerge. Blockchain is really in its infancy. There needs to be done a lot of experimentation before really we will
Could
notice.
you excite us with a time frame, perhaps? 5 years?
10?
I hope 5 years. I think 10. I don't know. I think in 5 years, definitely you will see some real-life applications.
Do you agree, Mr. De Bruin?
Yes, these things, it's always difficult to pinpoint that, but sometimes these things go much faster than you think. Sometimes they go undercover. Like internet started in 1964, and only in 1990, with the World Wide Web, it exploded. So there was a killer app, the World Wide Web, the browsers, that was a killer app for the internet. And I think we will see a lot of undercover blockchains making our life easier, but we won't totally realize it. We think, hey, this is working better than before, and all of a sudden things come together. And that can take a bit longer than you think, but it will be there within. Everybody will notice it in the near future. Yeah.
Great. I'm excited to see where this technology will take us. Before thanking our guests today, our next interview will be the philosopher Peter Singer. This will be on the 29th of May from 4 till 6, so a different time than usual. And equally important, we're also looking out for new interviewers. So if you want to interview just like us, our guests today, or Peter Singer, or any other of the big guests we get, check out our website for the application details. The deadline is on the 11th of June, and on the 7th we've got an information meeting at Crea Café over there at 5 o'clock. For now, let's have a warm round of applause for our guests of today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.